You've probably seen the headlines. Military coups are sweeping across parts of Africa, and it feels like decades of democratic progress are just vanishing. So today, we're going to dig into the deep roots of this and try to figure out why it's all happening now.
I mean, for a while there, it really seemed like things were moving in the right direction, right? So this feels like a huge, dangerous step backward. The big question we're tackling here is, why now? What's going on? We'll look at the history, the modern-day triggers, and what's fueling this comeback.
Okay, let's start with just one number to put this all in perspective. Ready? Over 200. Yeah, that's not a typo.
That's the staggering number of times a military has kicked out a government in Africa since the whole wave of independence started back in the 60s. So we're talking about a history that stretches all the way from the dawn of the post-colonial era right up to the news alerts you might be getting on your phone today. There's a pattern here, and we really need to get our heads around it.
All right, first up, to really get what's going on, we've got to look at this recent wave of takeovers. It's the reason this whole issue is suddenly back in the headlines in such a big way.
Okay, so to really understand the human cost of all this instability, we're going to zoom in on one really pivotal moment in the continent's history, the Nigerian Civil War. It's an incredibly powerful example of how a nation's dream, right after independence, can just completely shatter.
You know, this war didn't just come out of nowhere. The road to get there was paved over decades. It really all started way back in 1914, when the British basically mashed together culturally distinct regions to create the country of Nigeria. Fast forward to 1960, independence. Lots of hope, right? But the cracks were already showing. Then a controversial census in '63 just pours gasoline on the fire of ethnic mistrust. And then, 1966. The whole thing just explodes. There's a coup, seen as being led by Igbo officers. It's followed by a brutal, vengeful counter-coup, leading to horrific massacres of Igbo people in the north. And just like that, the stage was set for secession, an all-out war.
And look, these weren't just political moves on a chessboard. They triggered a real, devastating conflict, one that would end up claiming millions of lives and leaving scars that you can still see today.
You might know the great Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. He was already famous around the world for his novels, and he lived through all of this. He wrote a memoir about it, and he describes how his life and the lives of millions of his Igbo people just came to a crashing halt. One minute he's a celebrated writer, the next he's a refugee, literally fighting for survival. His story really grounds this massive historical event in a way that feels incredibly personal and real.
And the human cost, it's just astronomical. After the eastern region declared itself the Republic of Biafra in 1967, a brutal 30-month war kicked off. Get this, somewhere between 1 and 3 million people died. And most of them didn't die from bullets, they died from a devastating, completely man-made famine. It was a humanitarian crisis on an epic scale, and it brought the entire region's economy to a dead stop.
Okay, so let's zoom back out. We've seen this tragic example from Nigeria. Now let's use that as a foundation to really dissect the anatomy of a coup. Like, what exactly is it, and what different shapes can it take?
So, the textbook definition of a coup d'etat is pretty straightforward. It's an illegal and obvious attempt by the military or some other elite group inside the government to grab power from the person in charge. The key thing to remember is this isn't a revolution with people in the streets. It's an internal job, a changing of the guard by force.
But here's the thing. Not all coups are created equal. The political scientist Samuel Huntington actually broke them down into 4 different types. You've got your guardian coup, where the military says, hey, don't worry, we're just stepping in to restore order for a bit. Then there's the veto coup, which is all about stopping a government from making radical changes. An anticipatory coup is when the military jumps in to stop a new group from ever taking power. And finally, you have the reforming coup, where the military itself tries to completely restructure the whole country.
Okay, so now we know what a coup is. But that doesn't really answer the big why, does it? Why do they happen so often in certain places? Well, the answer usually comes down to this really toxic combination: strong men and weak institutions.
The excuses you hear from the coup leaders are almost always the same. You know, the government was corrupt, or they couldn't get anything done, or the elections were rigged, so we had no other choice. Sometimes it's about a security crisis they claim only they can solve. And here's a really crucial point. When a coup happens in one country, it can be contagious. It's like it gives the military in the neighboring country ideas.
And this right here is the heart of the problem. On one side, you had these strong men. All the power is focused on them, and they basically treat the country like it's their own personal property. And on the other side, weak institutions. We're talking about the courts, the parliaments, the constitutions.
All the things that are supposed to keep a leader in check. But they've been hollowed out, made powerless, often on purpose.
Think about it like this. In a country with really strong institutions, if you take out the leader, say they're impeached or something, the whole system doesn't collapse. The vice president steps in, the Constitution tells everyone what to do next, it holds. But when a powerful leader has spent years weakening those very institutions, getting rid of him creates a huge power vacuum. And guess who's standing by, ready and willing to fill that vacuum? Yep, the military.
And when this cycle just keeps repeating, you end up with something a scholar named Majak Diagut calls the gun class. It's basically a permanent military elite. Think of them as an aristocracy, but their power comes from weapons. They start to see themselves as the final word on who's in charge, and they operate completely outside the rules of the Constitution or what the people actually want.
So, this all brings us to the lasting damage, and some really big questions for a lot of countries today. What is the real cost of having this culture of coups?
Well, the impact is it's just devastating. Every single coup chips away at the rule of law. It destroys people's trust in democracy. It creates this constant climate of fear, which often leads to terrible human rights abuses. And all that instability? It just poisons the well for any kind of long-term development. It becomes a vicious cycle that just feeds on itself.
And that leaves us with the fundamental question, the big challenge. As long as that gun class believes that they have the final say, the future is always going to be uncertain. The real work, the hard work for so many nations is to build democratic institutions that are so strong, so resilient, and so respected that they can finally and permanently outlast the gun.